Imagine a place that held all the answers. Today, we're taking a journey deep into the ancient world's most spectacular intellectual achievement. We are going to explore a place that has captured the imagination of historians, scientists, and dreamers for well over 2 millennia. Get ready to step into a world where knowledge wasn't just power, it was the ultimate currency. Because today's explainer is all about the absolutely legendary Library of Alexandria. But before we dive into all its glory, we have to acknowledge the massive cinematic mystery hanging right over it. What actually happened to the world's greatest library? I mean, how does a sprawling, magnificent utopia containing the combined knowledge of human civilization just vanish? We're talking about an incredible beacon of light in the ancient world, a literal monument to human curiosity. And yet, it was entirely doomed. But to really understand the tragedy of its end, we first need to wrap our heads around the sheer, breathtaking scale of its beginning. Part 1. The ultimate quest for knowledge. To really grasp what the Library of Alexandria was, you have to understand the ancient world's profound reverence for learning. Knowledge wasn't just trivia for them, it was how empires were secured and how civilizations advanced. So let's watch this place transform from a conquered territory into the intellectual capital of the world. In 331 BC, Alexander the Great founds the city of Alexandria in Egypt. But Alexander doesn't stick around to build a library. Fast forward to around 295 BC. One of his generals, who became King Ptolemy I, officially initiates the library. Then, roughly 10 years later, in 285 BC, his son, Ptolemy II, massively expands on this vision. Within just a few decades, we go from literally a foundation stone in the sand to a booming, cosmopolitan epicenter where the greatest minds are beginning to gather.
And what was driving this rapid expansion? Well, it was a singular, almost impossible ambition. Their goal was to collect every book ever written. Just sit with that for a second. Think about the sheer audacity of the Ptolemies. They didn't just want a nice local library. They wanted to capture absolutely all human knowledge. Every scroll, every play, every philosophical text, every mathematical formula housed in one single geographic location.
Part 2. Collecting the world's books. Okay, having a lofty goal is one thing, but actually executing it, that requires some sheer ruthlessness. The rulers instituted what was basically a harbor confiscation policy. It was essentially state-sponsored intellectual piracy. Here's how it worked. Step 1. Whenever a ship arrived in the bustling port of Alexandria, authorities would board it and search the whole thing. Step 2. If they found any scrolls or books, they didn't ask to borrow them, they outright confiscated them. Step 3. The library scribes would copy and translate the texts. And here's the wild part. Often, the library kept the precious originals and just handed the freshly made copies back to the completely baffled ship captains. It was a systematic dragnet for information. And because Alexandria was a massive international trading hub, the scrolls they pulled off these ships were incredibly diverse. They were pulling in Egyptian historical texts, sweeping epics of classical Greek literature, intricate Persian administrative records, and profound Indian philosophical works. But they weren't just hoarding papyrus in different languages, no. They launched a monumental translation effort. They wanted to decode and truly understand the wisdom of all these distinct civilizations, breaking down language barriers to synthesize global knowledge. Part 3. Inside the Ancient Museum. So, they're pulling in all these texts by the boatload. But where is it all going? When we hear the word library, we usually picture one big, quiet, dusty room, right? Not Alexandria. This was a sprawling, luxurious knowledge campus. We're talking expansive reading halls flooded with natural light, dedicated scroll rooms carefully designed to protect the fragile papyrus from the elements. There were beautiful, tranquil botanical gardens where scholars could walk and reflect. And there were large lecture halls designed specifically for heated, passionate debates, right alongside specialized research areas for observing the stars or dissecting animals. It was a massive, vibrant campus. And here is the absolute best part for the scholars who worked there. The museum was a fully funded haven. Literally, if you were a top-tier intellectual in the ancient world, the Ptolemies subsidized your entire life. Scholars lived on site, they ate their meals together in grand dining halls, and they researched together. They didn't have to worry about paying rent or finding wealthy patrons. Their sole job, decreed by the rulers, was to dedicate their entire lives to thinking, debating, and discovering. Part 4. Discoveries of the Golden Age. When you lock the greatest minds in a luxurious complex with all the world's knowledge and take care of all their bills, incredible things happen. The discoveries that came out of this place brilliantly illustrate just how far ahead of their time these scholars were. You have Euclid, essentially writing the rules for geometry that kids still learn in school today. You have Eratosthenes, a geographer who literally calculated the circumference of the Earth using nothing but shadows and math, incredibly accurately, thousands of years before satellites were even a concept. Callimachus essentially invented modern library science by creating the very first library catalog, because, well, how else do you find anything in a massive sea of scrolls? And then there's Aristarchus, an astronomer who proposed a sun-centered universe centuries before Copernicus. The scientific breakthroughs happening in these halls were absolutely mind-bending. And all of this groundbreaking research was fueled by a collection of staggering proportions. Hundreds of thousands. That is the estimated number of scrolls the library contained at its absolute peak. While historians love to debate the exact figure, some say 40,000, some say up to 500,000, the sheer volume of papyrus housed in this complex is almost difficult to wrap your head around. It was, without a doubt, the undisputed information capital of planet Earth. Now, as amazing as all this is, it's really important that we ground our understanding in reality, because it is so easy to romanticize this place. We've got to separate history from myth. The fact is, Alexandria was a sprawling, gritty, highly functional research complex. It had a massive, aggressive translation operation and real, funded scholars doing incredibly hard work. The legend, however, often paints it as this flawless, singular, almost magical building with exact, exaggerated scroll counts that held all the mystical secrets of humanity. It wasn't magic, guys. It was human ingenuity, ambition, and very heavy state funding, all working in perfect harmony. Part 5. The Looming Catastrophe. But as we know, nothing this ambitious lasts forever in the ancient world. At the very height of its glorious golden age, right when Eratosthenes is measuring the earth and Aristarchus is mapping the heavens, this magnificent utopia of human knowledge sat completely unaware on the precipice of total, catastrophic devastation. All that papyrus, all that collected wisdom from every single corner of the known world was highly combustible, both literally and politically. The loss of the Library of Alexandria is widely considered to be one of the greatest tragedies in the history of human culture. It quite literally set our collective knowledge back by centuries. But how did it actually happen? Was it a raging, uncontrollable fire? Was it a targeted religious purge? Was it a slow, painful bureaucratic decay? Or was it the unintended casualty of one of history's most famous generals? Who or what wiped the Library of Alexandria from the face of the earth? Well, that is exactly the gripping mystery we are going to unravel in part 2 of this explainer. You absolutely won't want to miss it. See you then.
Right, let's jump straight into this explainer, picking up where we left off to tackle what is arguably history's greatest cold case. We're talking about the tragic, almost legendary fate of the Library of Alexandria. For centuries, this place wasn't just a library. It was the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. It housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. It was literally the ancient world's beacon of science, philosophy, literature, the whole shebang. And then, it just vanished. This mystery has obsessed historians and archaeologists for generations. So today, we're going to look at the actual evidence, strip away the Hollywood myths, and finally piece together what really happened to the greatest repository of knowledge on Earth.
Looking at the source material, we've got to ask the ultimate investigatory question. Who or what actually wiped this place off the map? I mean, when a crime this massive happens, the literal erasure of generations of human thought, human nature completely demands a culprit, right? We want that one villain to point the finger at. And over the centuries, history has definitely provided a lineup of high-profile suspects, from famous Roman generals to religious zealots. But as we're going to see, the historical record, it's rarely a simple game of Clue.
And this right here perfectly highlights the stark contrast between the popular myth and historical reality. On the left, we've got the story we all know from pop culture. One apocalyptic, dramatic fire burning the entire library to ashes in a single cinematic night. But the reality? Well, it's way more nuanced. The evidence doesn't point to one massive explosion of flames, but rather to centuries of slow decay, systemic neglect, and just multiple devastating conflicts. It wasn't one single event, guys. It was a heartbreaking, incredibly drawn-out tragedy.
Let's start with Section 1. Suspect number 1, Julius Caesar's siege.
Our first major suspect from the historical records is the legendary Roman general himself. Picture this. The year is 48 BC, and Julius Caesar is besieged in the royal quarter of Alexandria. He's totally outnumbered, he's cut off, and he desperately needs a tactical advantage. So, to stop the Egyptian fleet from cutting off his escape routes, Caesar makes a really drastic call. He orders his men to set fire to the enemy ships docked in the harbor. It was a successful military move, sure, but that fire violently spread from the docks and swept right into the city itself.
The flames raged, and history tells us a massive amount of literature was lost that day. But looking at the historical theories and the modern evidence, we really have to ask a highly specific question. Did the Great Library itself actually burn to the ground during this specific blaze? Because for centuries, Caesar has been the primary villain here, blamed for erasing the ancient world's memory in just one afternoon of military ruthlessness.
Well, actually, modern evidence paints a completely different picture. That fire was strictly targeted at the docks and the enemy fleet. And while the flames definitely reached the shore, historians now firmly believe the fire likely just destroyed waterfront warehouses. Now, these warehouses were holding thousands of priceless scrolls, maybe copies waiting to be exported, which, honestly, is a massive tragedy in its own right. But the main library structure? That was located further inland within the royal precinct, and it likely survived Caesar's siege completely intact. The heart of the library was still beating.
Which brings us to Section 2. If not Caesar, then it's death by 1,000 cuts through centuries of decline.
Since Caesar didn't entirely destroy it, the sources point to a totally different cause of death. As you can see on this timeline, it was a protracted decline over hundreds of years. After 48 BC, Alexandria fell firmly under Roman rule and kind of just gradually lost its status as the premier cultural capital of the world. Funding dried up, scholars weren't heavily subsidized by the state anymore. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire itself was going through this massive crisis of instability, and Alexandria was constantly getting caught in the crossfire of civil wars and rebellions. Then, a truly massive blow came from Emperor Aurelian in the 270s AD. During a campaign to suppress a rebellion in Egypt, Aurelian's troops actually laid siege to Alexandria, and the historical records tell us his forces caused catastrophic damage to the Brucheian. That's the specific royal district of Alexandria that housed the Great Library. While we obviously don't have a precise inventory of what was lost that day, historians pretty much agree that the physical structure and the collection took damage they would just never, ever recover from.
Moving on to Section 3, the religious purges and the ultimate fate of the Serapeum.
As the main Great Library fell into ruin and obscurity, the historical sources shift our focus to a really critical secondary location, the Serapeum. This served as a crucial annex, kind of like a daughter library. It was originally this grand pagan temple dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, but had morphed into a massive repository for thousands of scrolls. For a lot of scholars in the later Roman period, the Serapeum was essentially what kept the city's ancient knowledge and intellectual traditions alive.
But then we hit the year AD 391.
The historical texts detail a truly devastating turn of events that year. See, in the late 4th century, the Roman Empire was undergoing a massive religious transformation. Under Emperor Theodosius, pagan practices were completely outlawed. And during these intense religious purges in AD 391, the Serapeum was directly targeted. It was violently attacked and ultimately totally destroyed by religious mobs. Now, the primary target was the pagan temple itself, but its vast collection of texts was almost certainly decimated in all that chaos. This dealt a fatal, irreversible blow to the city's intellectual heritage. The daughter library was officially gone.
And finally, Section 4, the final myth, the Caliph Umar story.
The final historical theory we have to look at involves this super famous story that actually emerged much, much later. It claims that during the 7th century Arab conquest of Egypt, Caliph Umar ordered the remaining books to be used as fuel to heat the city's bathhouses. Sounds crazy, right? Well, modern historians heavily question this entire narrative. Why? Because the story didn't even appear in written records until centuries after the alleged event. Today, it's widely viewed as later political propaganda just designed to smear the conquerors. Plus, it completely contradicts the overwhelming evidence of the library's much earlier demise. By the time of the 7th century Arab conquest, there was almost certainly no great library left to destroy anyway.
So when we evaluate all these suspects side by side, the truth really emerges. The destruction was a highly complex, centuries-long tragedy. Caesar accidentally burned the waterfront warehouses, Aurelian's troops shattered the main library's district, religious mobs destroyed the surviving daughter library, and the Caliph Umar story, basically a historical myth. There wasn't one single villain. It was a combination of war, neglect, economic decline, and ideological conflict, all working together over 400 years to erase this magnificent institution.
Let's move to Section 5, the verdict and legacy. What was permanently lost? Having dismantled all those myths, we really have to look at what the permanent loss of this knowledge actually meant. The ultimate tragedy here isn't just the destruction of some beautiful buildings. It's the fact that countless, irreplaceable works of ancient science, brilliant philosophy, and foundational literature vanished forever. I mean, we're talking about the lost plays of Sophocles, ancient treatises on astronomy, groundbreaking medical texts, histories that we are simply never going to get back. The slow demise of the library left massive permanent gaps in our understanding of human history. It is an incredibly sobering reminder of just how fragile human progress actually is.
Finally, Section 6, the modern resurrection, the Bibliotheca Alexandria.
Because thankfully, the story doesn't just end in the ashes of the ancient world. Today, standing right there on the shores of the Mediterranean, the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina serves as a powerful resurrection of that ancient ideal. Opened back in 2002, this breathtaking facility isn't just some nod to the past. It's a totally vital, active center for preserving global knowledge today. It houses millions of books, multiple museums, research institutes, and a massive digital archive. It basically represents a global commitment to ensure that a tragedy like the loss of the ancient library never, ever happens again.
This modern effort really reminds us why this topic matters so deeply to all of us today. The active preservation of knowledge remains one of humanity's absolute most vital responsibilities. We kind of tend to take our digital world for granted, right? Assuming all our data is just going to be safe in the cloud forever. But history warns us that shifting political tides, conflicts, and even just sheer neglect can completely erase centuries of progress if we aren't careful stewards of our own culture. So, as we conclude our explainer on history's greatest mystery, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. In our rapidly changing digital-first world, what modern knowledge are we currently at risk of losing today? Are we actively protecting our history, or are we letting our own modern libraries slowly decay? Really think about that. Thank you so much for joining me to unravel this incredible story. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, definitely hit subscribe for more deep dives into history's most complex mysteries. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.